Hello. Oh, I see friendly faces in the front row. Thank you for being here. My name is Stephanie Ybarra, and I use she and her pronouns. I am a light-skinned Latinx woman. I have long black hair, and I'm wearing a patterned t-shirt with a pink blazer, black slacks, and against my better judgment, heels. I have to tell you, so today's keynote is all about vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. And I am going to model it thoroughly. First, by telling you that what I'm doing today on this stage, I have never done before. I'm going to be processing this talk in real time, using some combination of notes and energy and off-the-cuff inspiration. So, I'm going to bring up the first slide just to say the assignment for today. This quote from Octavia Butler, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you," kind of sums up what we're doing today. This exchange right here, me talking to you, you listening, reacting, me feeding off of your reaction, that exchange changes me. And I hope it will change you just a little bit. And if we do that, we've nailed it. We've knocked it out of the park. Before I go any further, I've told you a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you a little bit more, but I need to get to know you a bit. I have many questions, but I have the first question. It involves pumpkin, and I was told it would be appropriate to provide context for pumpkin. I cannot speak for all of North America. I can only speak on behalf of the entirety of the United States when I say we have a pretty healthy obsession with pumpkin when the fall rolls around. Not everybody, though. We are not a monolith. And so what I'd like to know now, I just want you to raise your hand if you are pro-pumpkin. You like your pumpkin spice latte, your pumpkin cheesecake, your pumpkin soup, pumpkin, look around, pumpkin. Okay, hands down. Moment of vulnerability, y'all. Who among you is anti-pumpkin? Don't like it, don't care. Look at that! You are not alone! Excellent, thank you. Now, I'd like you to raise your hand if you've ever experienced love and joy. Yes. Now I'd like you to raise your hand if you've ever experienced grief or heartbreak. Same. Here's a preaching to the choir moment. Raise your hand if you believe our arts and culture organizations are mission critical to building greater empathy and understanding for each other. Yes. All right, now raise your hand if you have ever heard or said the phrase, "It's not personal." Keep your hands raised if you believed it. Very interesting. I find that so curious that our work is designed to facilitate empathy, and yet we regularly justify words and actions with the phrase, "It's not personal." So I'm going to get personal. When I was an undergraduate student, I was an undergraduate acting student, and getting ready to graduate, I was asked by a professor to write down who I was. And me, like many of my classmates, I wrote down nouns like actor, artist, student. And then he challenged us to imagine what would be left if we ever decided to, graduate, stop acting, stop making art. Then what? Who would we be? He invited us to dig for aspects of our identities that would never change, which was bananas to me because change is constant, and all parts of my identity are subject to evolution and change, except daughter, sister, friend. Those are the aspects of who I am, which are core to me, and they will never leave. And it seems so simple, and it seems so obvious, and yet those words are very rarely used when I introduce myself. In fact, a few years ago, I was doing a keynote with a colleague of mine, and we decided to introduce ourselves without any reference to our professional credits. So just to practice this idea of bringing our full selves into spaces even when they were formal and professional. And I found it oddly comforting to introduce myself as a big sister with all of the requisite attributes of big sister, as a book lover, as a caregiver to a high-functioning chihuahua named Bowie, and perhaps my favorite, as Tia to Bianca. I introduced myself as unfinished and ever-changing, and it was incredibly liberating in the moment, and that was the first and last time I ever shared that introduction publicly. How about that? I started my career in theater almost 30 years ago as an actor. And in fact, I have a running joke with my team about how many times I reference having a BFA in acting. And so I wanted to make sure and slip in this reference for their bingo cards. You're welcome. As I transitioned into administration, into working in marketing and development and operations, I intentionally sidelined my actor self, my artist self. I made myself fit into whatever box was being offered to me at the time. And I, as a result, rapidly developed just a masterful capacity for compartmentalization. Now, anybody who exists within a marginalized identity or identities, and in my case, that's a young-ish Latinx woman, we know that any amount of emotion, feelings, expressions of doubt, all of it can easily give way to very unhelpful and sometimes harmful stereotypes and assumptions. I learned very early that despite my own understanding of my inner strength and my inner confidence, that my empathetic tendencies, remember, actor, didn't match the dominant outward perception of strength and confidence and logic. So I did what actors do, I rehearsed. I rehearsed the dominant perception of strength and confidence and logic so that others might see me the way I wanted to be seen, pretzeling myself into whatever inauthentic but palatable version of myself the world needed to see. When I was interviewing for my job at Baltimore Center Stage, my friend and colleague, collaborator, Kwame Kwei-Armah, maybe you've heard of him. He's my predecessor at Baltimore Center Stage, and I was like, Kwams, what do I need to know? And he says, Steph, you only need to know one thing. You need to show up as yourself. He said, show up as yourself. They need to know who they're getting, and you need to know how they respond to who they're getting. That was really sound advice. And so in my interview process, I did what I do. I prefer direct communication, so I communicated directly. I'm an outspoken advocate for anti-racism, so I was like anti-racism, anti-racism this, anti-racism that, anti-racism this, anti-racism that. Leading with my Latinx foot, my Mexican foot. I put it just off, thank you, yes, Mexicans. So I sort of put it all out there, and they hired me anyway. I thought I was home free. Wrong. No sooner had I launched my first season of programming, which featured a slate of 6 productions, 5 of which were written and directed by artists of color, telling stories that centered people of color, and I found that actually my whole self was not at all welcomed. Quote, why do you use Latinx? Latinx is BS. Your vision for inclusion isn't welcoming to white people. Quote, there are too many black and brown people on stage. White people need to see their stories too. Quote, there are people who are very important to this organization, and if they leave, it will not go well for you. Quote, she uses EDI as a crutch because she doesn't know what she's doing. Quote, people are saying how much the board and staff hate her. Quote, she's incompetent. That was just a sampling of the direct quotes that were said to me or about me before I had gotten halfway through my first season. Board members, staff members, audience members, donors. I was surrounded. I got a crash course in just how much resilience and armor were going to be required of me in order to survive my job. Note, I said survive my job, not to thrive in it, not to find joy in it, just to make it through as me. Early in my first season, I had to fly home to Texas because my father, who had been battling cancer for many years, he took an unexpected turn for the worse. And because the world is hilarious, I had no sooner had I touched down in Texas, I got a phone call saying that weekend, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor would also be attending my theater. And she is, a hero. She is a hero to me, to my sisters. We all just sort of look up to her. She's just a giant. Oh yes, I see we have some Sotomayor fans. I decided to leave my family, to leave my father and my mother, and to fly back to Baltimore for 24 hours. I was exhausted and raw and emotional, but it's okay because compartmentalization. Before the show, we met up. I was wearing a black jumpsuit. She was wearing a black jumpsuit. And so when the photographer was taking our picture, the photographer said, "Oh my gosh, you're both wearing black jumpsuits." And she says, "It's a Latina thing." Dead. I could have just ended my entire career right there. But I didn't. I went downstairs to my office and I had a phone call. I had a phone meeting with a colleague. We were struggling with some things and they were not happy with me and I was not happy with them. And during this phone call, I did something that I can count on one hand in the 30 years I've been doing this. I lost my temper. Yeah, I lost it. I was yelling. I raised my voice. I was teeth gnashing. I was the worst possible version of myself. And I was so ashamed. After I hung up the phone, I literally collapsed, like crumbled right where I was in my office and just wept. And then I had to go back upstairs to meet the justice and to meet the cast afterwards. And, wiped off the mascara, that kind of thing. And we're standing backstage with the actors and they are heaping love and affirmation on Justice Sotomayor. And she's taking it all in. She's so graceful and gracious. And then she says, "Thank you so much. You're so kind. I need to tell you something. I need you to know that at some point, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to rule in a way that you don't like. And I'm going to say things that you don't agree with. I'm going to disappoint you." And my mind was completely blown that this woman could stand there and be that plain and vulnerable. When I got back to Texas, my father was in hospice, and he died 3 days later. And that armor that I had been so diligently building up for 30 years, it just came crumbling down. I had nowhere else to hide. Formative years of my career were at the Public Theater, where I was running the mobile unit. And this is the community touring arm of the Public. We took Shakespeare productions into homeless shelters and prisons and community centers and libraries. And I'm bringing it into this space because I'm recalling one performance in particular I wanted to share today. We were at Bedford Hills, which is a maximum security women's prison, and I was talking to the correctional officers about the rules of engagement. How far away do we need to stand? Can we shake hands? That kind of thing. I had these rules pretty well in hand, but I just wanted to double check. And on this particular day, the guard on duty says, "Don't even look at them. They don't exist. Pretend like they're not there." Can you imagine? They don't even exist. So I went to my actors and I was like, y'all, he said this. And they said, no. And they proceeded to walk around the space before the show. And I do mean every one of the audience members. They fanned out and they said, hi, how are you? My name is Stephanie. My name is Rosalind. My name is Brandon. I'm going to be playing the role of Juliet. Do you know the story? Yeah, it doesn't go well for her. What's your name? How are you doing today? That kind of thing. And just that simple, basic act of connecting with another human to human, not actor to audience. That act was revolutionary, radical. And the feedback that we got the most from our incarcerated communities on tour was, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for recognizing my humanity. The fact of the matter is that we are surrounded and inundated with systems and practices and policies and a culture that wants to dehumanize us. It's easier that way. Other us, divide us, reduce us to the most simplistic version or explanation of ourselves. And I don't think it's a good idea, but it's the dominant sort of culture that we swim in. And when I bring up incarcerated communities, I'm drawing your attention to one extreme manifestation of the structural dehumanization that we are engaged in as a society. But I want to be very clear in this room that we perpetuate dehumanization every day. How? Okay, so I'm going to get to the how in just a second. I moved to share a story first of one example of a moment where I experienced not an extreme version of dehumanization, but just I was talking to a colleague and I had a conversation with one of our team members and my feelings were hurt. In the matter of talking, my feelings got hurt because I'm a person. And I was sad. And I said so. I said, I'm sad and my feelings are hurt. And my colleague said, Stephanie, I'm sorry. I need to reflect something back to you. You are the artistic director. Your title comes first. I know you are a woman of color, you're all of these things, but in this space, you're a leader and your title comes first. And you know, I almost believed her. I almost bought it. I almost believed that the title of artistic director usurped my own humanity. And in that moment, I was transported immediately back to my undergraduate theater professor asking us who we were. And I was fortified by my friend Kwame's words, show up as yourself. And from then on, honestly, I have not been able to unhear the micro ways that dehumanization occurs in our workplaces. See if this sounds familiar. The powers that be, artistic, leadership, the higher ups, or how about marketing wants, Devo is insisting, the institution doesn't care, the institution this, the institution, can you hear it? What happens if we just acknowledge our team members in marketing need? Brandon in Devo would like. Why do we insist on removing the human element of our work? Because it's not personal. I don't buy it. Innovation and evolution occur with exploration and experimentation and learning. And in order to do that, people have to feel free to imagine. They have to feel comfortable wondering. They need to be able to bring their experiences and their insights to the table. And now this requires what I like to call creating the conditions for belonging. belonging, not inclusion, belonging, such that each person who engages with our organizations feels connected, safe, seen. My offering to you today is that we don't get to belonging without bringing our whole selves and without inviting others to bring their whole selves to the table. And that requires authenticity. And authenticity requires vulnerability. A word about vulnerability, though, when I'm talking about vulnerability in this context, what I'm not talking about is the structured, the structuralized, the systemic vulnerability that I was referencing before. I'm talking about a self-activated vulnerability, which is also not the same as, here's what we're going to do. We're going to relive our trauma for everybody, and that's no. Having agency to share who you are in total, I think requires a ton of courage, but I feel like it is also necessary to the work we do. So instead of feeling the pressure to pretzel, instead of being excluded for who they are not, our colleagues might, with belonging, they might feel embraced for who they are. In other words, belonging is personal. Now, if you, like me, get a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of creating the conditions for everyone to feel like they can show up with their whole selves because everyone is a lot of people, then I would offer the words of author, artist, and organizer Adrienne Maree Brown. She says, "Small is all. How we are at the small is how we are at the big. Small is all." That means each one of us at the small has the capacity to push levers and to create and activate change, to bring our whole selves and to invite others to do the same. And I'd like to take you through just a few very small stakes, small micro tools, if you will, that I use in my practice of vulnerability. And it is a practice. It is not a destination. It is an ongoing practice. There are phrases that I use that I find to be anchoring for myself, and I want to share them with you now. They sound like this. I don't know. I apologize. I'm sorry for the impact I had on you, full stop. I'm struggling with, I'm challenged by, I'm curious about, I have an offering, I have a different perspective. Modeling vulnerability from wherever you are inside of the organization might also look like this. I'm speaking in draft, I'm workshopping this idea, I'm standing in front of a room that holds 1,600 people, having never done this particular format before. I am having a vulnerable moment. I invite you to examine your gathering rituals. You have them, even if you don't think you do. I invite you to notice how you come together in space, whether it's one-on-one or in full company meetings and everything in between. How you gather matters. It sets the tone for people being able to show up as their full selves. I invite you to start with some human check-ins that have nothing to do with work. You could use pumpkins, maybe. I invite you to share and invite people to share their access needs. To invite people to say, I have a migraine today, I'm keeping my camera off. I am just not in the zone today, please forgive me if I have a little bit of brain fog. And then say thank you. Say thank you to those who offer a different opinion, who offer the feedback, who name their needs, who share their feelings and emotions. Validate it. Just say thank you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate the vulnerability. Wherever possible, I also invite you to create shared meaning and shared understanding. I think that creating shared meaning and understanding within teams leads to, well, greater efficiency and greater productivity and greater fellowship amongst the teams, but also it leads to the sort of comfort, the pathways to comfort, to vulnerability, to authenticity. I share these humble tools and tactics with you with the full knowledge that this group of people has many more tools and practices to share. The abundance of knowledge in this room is staggering. I leave you with the invitation to begin building or to deepen your own practice for making space for your whole self and doing that for others. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for making me feel so held, so welcomed, so safe. And because bringing my whole self to this moment requires that I use these final seconds to reveal my love of puns, I will leave you with, thank you for coming to my test talk. Goodbye.